When I come around, got the whole thing wobbin'.
Now we move on to our next and final segment, the ACC preview. Now each and every time, just kind of like the quarterback thing, we preview each and every Power 5 conference schools. I will go over usually the record I will tell the record. Antoine will go the review of the record, seeing if he necessarily agrees with that. I've looked over the schedules, and I can determine based on new players and all that stuff what my prediction early on is for that. Then we go over the best players in the ACC, the Heisman hopefuls within the conference, and impact freshmen that you guys are going to know about during the season, So here we go, ACC preview. They have two subdivisions, the Atlantic and the Coastal. We'll go over the Atlantic first because this one's relatively the easiest. Listen, Clemson has to go 12-0 this year. They are bona fide. They are easily probably one of the biggest betting favorites heading into the season. They are probably heavily favored in every game. They return so many starters. And it's especially that defensive front four with Kellen Farrell, Christian Wilkins, Dexter Lawrence, Bryant, and a whole lot of added new pieces. There's no way that, because not only do you have a high-powered offense, you also have a defensive front to go get after the quarterbacks when they have to pass the ball in order to keep up with you. So Clemson has to me, 12-0 for me.
Yeah, the expectation is absolutely 12-0, and they'll be heavily favored in every single game that they go into. I mean, they have some games where you can't actually think that there might be one. There's an out-of-conference game against Texas A&M, and going down the road at Texas A&M is kind of a difficult thing.
Right.
And as well as facing Boston College on the road late into the year as well too, at night, on national television late at night in November. Those games always kind of always worry you as well too. Those are maybe the two games I could see possible slip-ups, but they should win every single game.
Right. And
they should be favored by every single game and pretty much be blowing out almost everybody out of the water.
Right. Now, granted, you may question whether about their receiving core and all that stuff, but they have a guy named T. Higgins that I feel like is going to explode onto the scene. And Dabo Swinney tends to always have, he's had he had DeAndre Hopkins, and then he went to Sammy Watkins and Martavis Bryant. There's always been guys that he's came in and exploded into that offense when they're the number one receiver.
They've had a bunch of really good number one wide receiver, and then you can't forget the slot guy, man. Like people always forget about Frank Renfro, man. Renfro, like that guy always finds spaces in the holes in the defense, and when things get shifty, for whether it was Kelly Bryant last year or Deshaun Watson the year before, they kind of always went to that guy, and they have a weapon. They have the speed at running back. They have the offensive line, Mitch Hyatt, and all of those type of guys. They've got all this talent where they've built and accumulated over the years, and now they're living up to expectations. Because people are acting like Clemson is new to getting great recruits.
They've always had good recruits. They've
always been able to recruit. Now, finding someone who can develop those recruits, they haven't been able to do. And Dabo's hired a good staff, a really good staff. A well-handled staff that can really handle his team, and he's, coaching the coaches. He's doing exactly what Nick Saban does over down there as far as coaching those coaches to be really good coaches, to make sure that he's developing this guy the way he wants him. He has a set of eyes, watching each and every one of the coaches, and handling all the positions, and those guys are getting developed in ways that in the past that Clemson players weren't getting developed,
Right.
They've always been able to recruit five-star recruits all day long, and those five-star recruits don't do nothing but get them to 9 wins and 8 wins. And Clemson fans are like, oh, man, we're never going to see another national championship since 1981. And it's kind of changing. The narrative has changed around them.
Yep. where they have become a consistent playoff 4 team. Other teams in the Atlantic Division, I think Clemson's going to run away with it. Other teams, LSU and Florida State, I both have an 8-4. Louisville. I'm sorry, Louisville at 8-4. Florida State at 8-4. Louisville, Bobby Petrino's an offensive genius out there. He's able to work with whatever. He's had Teddy Bridgewater, Lamar Jackson, and it's hard to believe that they have another quarterback there, Jawan Pass, who was highly rated than both of them combined in the recruiting rankings, and is now finally getting his time to shine in that Louisville offense. Florida State is going through a transitional year. They do bring in a new coach, I believe, Willie Taggart, who came from Oregon. And
after 1 year.
Yeah, and they have an extremely talented and promising defensive back group there. Now, the problem is offensively, they do have Cam Akers, and the question mark at quarterback is going to be with Blackman there. But it's still going to be a rough year, but I still think they're a bit too talented to have another down season again. The Coastal Division, I think it's only 2 teams in the running. Miami's going to go 11-1. There, Miami does riding on the success of last year in the turnover chain. And they do add some good pieces out there in Miami. And my other team is Virginia Tech at 9-3. Josh Jackson, the quarterback, the redshirt freshman for Virginia Tech, is going to be one of the hot names of the ACC this year. And he was going to come in and play relatively last year and got redshirted due to, I believe, an injury. And now he's going to come in and he's going to be one of the big focal points of that Virginia Tech offense. How do you feel about about Miami for the Coastal Division? I believe 11-1.
The Miami going 11-1. Yeah, they should be. They should definitely be the favorites to win almost all their games until that ACC championship game. You know, but Miami's probably going to have is led by Rich Rodriguez. I mean, not Rich Rodriguez, but Mark Richt.
Yeah, Mark Richt
always seems to have that one letdown game, even going back to Georgia.
Yeah,
where it doesn't play the level that they're supposed to. A year ago, we saw it against Pitt. But sometimes you'll have multiple of them, but he is almost guaranteed to have one letdown game. Even the year that he lost only one game at Georgia and won the SEC. He still had that one game. That's the thing that's always prevented him from being in that national championship over his years. So, yeah, I think that it's safe to say that Miami's going to lose at least a game before the ACC championship.
Yeah, the games that I had in question, and I determined one loss, the games I have in question are Florida State, Boston College, and Georgia Tech. I believe there's going to be a loss between those 3 teams. No, not Florida State, Boston College, Georgia Tech, or Virginia Tech. Now, they do open the season against LSU, but we already discussed how we felt about Ed Orgeron and that LSU team. I think Miami is a bit more more consistent and talented.
Not necessarily just talented. I just think that they're playing better football right now.
Right.
And that LSU is, and they're just a better coach team as well too, because Mark Richt has really put himself a really great staff together.
Exactly. And that's about it for the...
Virginia Tech could sneak up on them, right?
Yeah, Virginia Tech also as well, too, at 9-3. Miami, like I said, at 11-1. But there's 4 games in question for me that I had to coin flip with at this point of the season. You know, they could lose to Virginia Tech. They could lose to a Georgia Tech. Because Georgia Tech going against triple option, you'll never face that only once a year when you're in the ACC, and that's Georgia Tech.
No.
And it's a very different team to go up against, you know, and it's not a very fun team at all to play against. So that's my and Miami, and it's like in Mark Richt, like you said, if he plays against team and certain injuries happen, I think Virginia Tech could jump them in the coast, and Virginia Tech could be placing Clemson, but ultimately, both me and you have Clemson winning the ACC and being the lone representative of the ACC to be in the playoff 4.
Yeah, I agree with you in that department. It's the only team I could really like coming into the season that I see. I mean, there's always surprise teams and all that kind of stuff, but the only team I really see that has a real heavy chance in this conference really to make it and represent it is going to be Clemson for the third straight year.
Right. And best players in the ACC. Now, the best players in the ACC, we have the whole Clemson front four. Kellen Farrell, Christian Wilkins, Dexter Lawrence, and Bryant. I mean, what more can you say about them that already hasn't said? You know, there's 3 guys that are bona fide, almost first-round picks.
Yeah. But for the most part, from the media.
Yeah.
From the media. But I don't necessarily see it that way. And some of the guys I've talked to in the past that really study the draft don't necessarily see that either. But that's for the draft's sake. For college football, a lot of times how they rank players is based on a lot of time what their reputation is. And Clemson is going to have this reputation of dominant defense, and they rightfully so, because they are really dominant up front. Because when you have 4 guys that can play at the next level, that are going to play at the next level,
right?
That are going to play at the next level, and probably be selected really high. When you have that kind of thing, it's kind of hard to ignore that. It's actually even a better defensive line than what North Carolina State put together. You know,
the year before, yeah.
On paper, North Carolina State, I thought they were just freaking monstrous. And even Ohio State a year ago, you know, everybody talks about their defensive line. It's not at the level of Clemson's this year.
Right.
This would have to be up there with some of those Alabama linebacker units to compare with, if you're going to compare a unit. I don't think that we've seen a better defensive line returning into college football in the past maybe decade plus.
Right, exactly. Where these guys are that talented and that, and you know, a big group of people. Next up on best players, best offensive lineman, arguably Mitch Hyatt out of Clemson.
Of course, this guy has literally faced almost every person that walks through that NFL door. Like every game I turn on for Mitch Hyatt, there's an NFL guy he had to face. From Harold Landry to Tim Williams to this guy he's faced so many NFL level players. Lorenzo Carter, all of these type of guys. He's faced Leonard Floyd. He's faced so many NFL players.
Bradley Chubb.
Myles Garrett, all of them.
Yup, he has faced all of them. And also the fact that he plays these guys in practice, too, the guys that we just mentioned.
Yeah, he's going to be ready there. And on his reputation alone, I expect him to win the Outland Trophy.
Right.
For the best lineman in football.
One of the running backs on this list is Cam Akers. Cam Akers out of Florida State, I think, will have a nice year this year. But you have a running back that you'd like to talk about in the ACC.
Oh, I love A.J. Dillon from Boston College. He's definitely one of the performers that you could look at as possible Heisman candidates this year. You know, he's definitely will have the numbers, and the team will really be built around him at BC out there. And when, you know, a guy can tote the rock 30 times, built like a workhorse, you know, he's at 245 pounds, you know, 6'1". When you get a guy like that who can pound the ball all day long,
right?
You could have monstrous numbers, kind of similar to what Andre Williams did a few years ago at BC. And if he has a big game against maybe Clemson, you know, we might be actually talking about him being a Heisman candidate. And I think that he might actually be the best running back in the conference over Cam Akers.
Right. Some of the better defensive backs here, Levante Taylor and Stanford Samuels III out of Florida State. Florida State is always known to get highly touted and talented guys at the defensive back position, and these are just the next long line of generational defensive backs they have there. And both of them highly touted out of high school. Both have lived up, and they've been buried in the depth chart, to be quite honest. Levante Taylor got playing time since he was a true freshman, because his talent alone, you couldn't put him on the bench. Jawan Pass is one of my highly prolific quarterbacks in here that I talked about taking the reins next. Obviously, there's going to be a drop-off from a guy like Lamar Jackson and even Teddy Bridgewater, but I think Jawan Pass is probably the happy medium between the two. Teddy Bridgewater was a good passer more than he was a runner, and obviously we saw the explosiveness and not discredit any of the arm talent also that Lamar Jackson had, but Jawan Pass is a very capable runner and thrower of the football. He will do very well in that offense. And obviously T. Higgins, a guy that I fully expect him to explode onto the scene, being a 1,000-yard receiver and probably being the best receiver in the ACC.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting between him. I have a battle with him and Armon Richards from Miami as well, too. A big, explosive, talented guy coming off of an injury and a really let-down year where he just kept having problems with injuries over and over. And then, I expected him to have a really big year considering David Njoku, who was a first-round pick, was gone. And it was supposed to be his team, and he was coming off of this amazing freshman year. His sophomore year, he kind of blanketed it out. Had to deal with a lot of injuries. Had to deal with a lot of growing up because he didn't have to face that for some odd reason his freshman year. The coaches weren't on him as hard as they were his sophomore year. It just seemed like he just went into pouting mode. It led to drops. It led to him also not playing as best as he possibly could. He'll be back next year, and I expect him to do what Sammy Watkins did. Sammy Watkins came in like a gangbuster, had a slump during his sophomore year, and then came back his junior year and dominated. And then he was one of the best wide receivers in all of college football. I think that could be the same thing with him.
Right. And now we go, finally, the last part of the ACC preview. We do Impact Freshmen. Some new faces that you may see on campus that may perform and you may see on the field. Now, I have a couple players on this list. I have Xavier Thomas, the number 3 overall player, number one overall defensive end. Xavier Thomas, edge for Clemson. Also another guy, KJ Henry, an edge rusher also for Clemson. And Jackson Carman, an offensive lineman, preferably tackle, also at Clemson. The two edge rushers to me and Antoine have always said this about edge rushers. They're the least likely to get redshirted based on depth and the fact that rushing the passer, you could never have too many of those guys. And if you are talented, they will see the field. Now, granted, you may ask, how can they go against those other 4 guys in front of them? Well, if Clemson's blowing out people like they should be, somebody has to come in and be in the backups. And there's more likely so you're going to see these 2 names out there on the field. You got a guy from Miami. This is a guy all Miami fans know about. Here's his son, Al Blades Jr. He's going to be playing out there at the U. Other names you need to look out for. Jaron Williams, a pro-style quarterback, ranked number 77 overall in the top 100 off 24/7 Sports. He's a guy that's actually looking to beat out and be the starting quarterback there in Miami and beat out Malik Rozier. Is it Malik Rozier?
Malik Rozier.
Yeah. And who struggled, I believe, at the end of the season last year for Miami. And now Malik Rozier also isn't a Mark Richt guy also. So this is Mark Richt has finally supposedly said this is one of the quarterbacks that he wanted to recruit and come after. So be on the lookout for him. My class to look out for. Now granted, they may start a lot of true freshmen, or this class may have the biggest impact to team success in future years. But I'm going to call my shot now is NC State. NC State got a whole bunch of quality guys, not top premier guys, not top 5-star guys, but look at guys like a Peyton Wilson, a linebacker, positional ranked number 4 overall, nationally ranked 79th overall, running back Ricky Pearson. He's going to look a nice big back at 6'2", 202 pounds. Other guys on there, defensive tackle Aleem McNeil, cornerback Tayon Palmer, and their quarterback, who I believe you were going to know about him in the future, a guy named Devin Leary.
Devin Leary, I've heard about him too.
Yeah.
From New Jersey?
Yeah, from New Jersey.
Yeah. I've heard of him. Yeah, of course, definitely. That's definitely one of the guys that in this class that it looks intriguing, and the Wolfpack have really put themselves in position. And that's what can happen when you start putting guys to the next level. You know, those kids start getting interested in the fact that hey man, this guy's developing us the right way and getting us to that hump, and you can really testify to that. And it works in every sport, every level. You know.
Right, and they're hitting in very well. They're recruiting very well in the state of North Carolina, where they're at.
That hotbed, man, and it's definitely one of the places.
And also getting a lot of guys. I mean, they have 3 guys here from the state of New Jersey alone. They got Georgia guys here, and some Florida and Virginia guys, and even one California kid. So they are going out of their reach, as we said earlier on the podcast, extending the reach of your search in recruiting. You know, there's no state too small or too big to go get a guy out of.
Mm-hmm.
And
can I ask you a question though?
Yeah, go ahead.
Do you think Trevor Lawrence plays this year?
This has been the hottest question there's been all year about Clemson due to the.
Right, because I think that Clemson was winning in spite of Kelly Bryant. Unpopular to consensus, I do think that quarterbacks have to be able to throw somewhat in the college level.
Right.
A consistent championship level quarterback, and I didn't think that Kelly Bryant wasn't a good enough thrower. You know, he can get away because Clemson's so ultimately talented, and they're going to run first, and he can run himself too. But the hype around Trevor Lawrence, and the way I saw him in some of those camps, you know, just winging the ball, and I'm like, whoa, this guy's got, you know, long hair, and he's throwing it out there like 1,000,000 miles an hour. So, like, what do you think?
Personally, I mean, you got to look at it the same situation as Georgia of last year, but at the same time, this is completely different. Where Georgia, it's like, obviously, don't put them in until Kelly Bryant gets hurt or messes up. And it's not even and to me, my thought would be messing up as in the sense you can still win the game, but if your offense isn't clicking like Clemson should be, you have to really consider putting in Lawrence. And the thing about it is, where Bryant is the starter just based on success and the fact that he's been there longer.
I don't know about success.
Yeah.
But yeah, definitely being there longer and waiting his
But
turn.
if you're talking about talent alone, and we're talking about he's a way better thrower, way better talented, and I think the thing about it is Bryant wasn't highly touted and he isn't highly regarded. It's just the fact that they won a lot of games with him. That's essentially why he's still the starter.
Uh-huh.
But you're looking at a guy like Trevor Lawrence. To me, if it was me, I think he should have been day one starter. I would have done it. Because I think, and because ultimately, if he messes up, I mean, like if he's really the thing that's costing you a game, go to Kelly Bryant, you know. And you also have another guy on the team, Hunter Johnson, as well too, who was a 5-star guy as well too on the team. But I would go with Trevor Lawrence. I think Trevor Lawrence fits this offense almost perfectly, and he is. I would start him there at Clemson. I think they would be more successful in the passing aspect of the game. And he is also sneaky athletically fast, too, as well. But arm talent alone, I think he should be the starter. How would you have handled it?
I'm not 100% sure because you obviously study the quarterbacks and whether you're going to play. But based on what I've seen from Kelly Bryant and what everybody else is telling me about Trevor Lawrence, I'm thinking that, hey, maybe like you get that first game, you play Kelly Bryant obviously as the start of the first game, and in that second half, I keep my starters in because they're facing Boardman, I believe.
Yeah.
And then I keep my starters in for a couple of snaps, and then I decide before week 2 who is going to be my starter. I almost use that as a preseason game, you know,
right, for
who's going to be my starting quarterback.
I mean,
Kelly Bryant's going to have majority of the first team snaps, but it's probably in the second half I keep my starters back in there, and then I bring in the young freshman quarterback, see how he plays with the starters. If I feel the momentum goes a little bit more to that kid, and I'm going to favor the freshman, obviously, because obviously Kelly Bryant's going to be in a situation where it's a meaningful snap. You know, you're facing Foreman. You're probably going to blow him out by the first half.
Yeah, and they do technically.
And then I'll make that switch. That's what I would do. You know, if the switch is needed to be, because if he sees that he's a little bit not ready for the game, or he's struggling and all of those type of things, then maybe it's not time for Trevor Lawrence yet, because we don't want to blow the whole season where all these seniors came back to win a national championship. You know,
and you did it just to start your.
And then you start your freshman, and he's not ready, and you lose game 2 at Texas A&M because you know the stage was too big for him.
Right.
And that blows your chance to make it to the college football playoffs.
You know what? I would tend to change my mind in the sense that I seeing the schedule, looking at the schedule now. Number one, Foreman. I would do what you would have said. You know, start off Kelly Bryant. First half, second half, relatively third to maybe halfway through fourth quarter, Trevor Lawrence gets all the snaps. And,
you know, obviously, the blow at that point, you know.
Yeah.
You don't want to seem like an asshole who's still throwing the ball. You're throwing the ball at
and putting up the score. Yeah.
Running up the score. Yeah.
Yeah. Then Texas A&M game. This would be the telling point to me. I'm starting Bryant at Texas A&M, and depending how this game goes, tells me what I'm doing moving forward. Because it's going to be at Kyle Field away from home, and you got a well-coached team now. Now, granted, this is going to be the time you want to take on an Texas A&M team because this isn't really all of Jimbo Fisher's recruits, and this is his first year getting used to it, you know, playing at Kyle Field and all these guys. Depending on how that team goes, if Kelly Bryant sucks, they still win. Or if Kelly Bryant sucks, regardless of the result, they play Georgia Southern next. That's when you do the switch. That's when you say, all right, you either make Trevor Lawrence number one, he plays all the meaningful snaps in that game, and you see how it is. Like, you finally see him take first team, and it's not a blowout. It's his offense, and then you take on the rest of the season with him there. Or if Kelly Bryant's there, hey, you keep doing, you keep him at quarterback. If he played well enough to win you the game, or if he played to win you the game, you keep him in against Georgia Southern, and you do the same thing against Fulham. You keep Trevor Lawrence ready and warmed up just in case. There's the last thing they should do is to either not give him any meaningful snaps until it's like the fourth quarter and all they're doing is running the ball. They should always keep him warmed up. They should always keep him in the ready, because the moment Kelly Bryant goes down or it's a bad injury, he is the one who has to come in. And he has to have his arm ready and warmed up and be familiar with the offense and the players.
Well, yeah, he should be. That should be the situation. But for Kelly Bryant, that's kind of rough, though, in that type of a situation.
Of course.
Having to deal with that and, ultimately getting beat out by Deshaun Watson. They were competing when they were both freshmen, too. So getting beat out by him for the second string spot, and then now getting beat out by another freshman, and things at Clemson just didn't work out the way that you expected.
Yeah, but at the same time, step up your game, and you wouldn't have to worry about that.
I know. But obviously, getting beat out is no fun.
Of course.
That's the love about sports. It's all about competition. You're not good enough to play, or you're not going to play. And maybe it's a generational thing. Like every kid feels like, hey, they should get a participation trophy.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's obviously that as well too. So, yeah.
But yeah, and then I guess we didn't touch on this. The only Heisman hopefuls we had was Kelly Bryant and A.J. Dillon. I think this ACC is probably the weakest Heisman hopeful, out of the Power 5 group. I think this is the least likely one.
I don't really see a real Heisman candidate outside of A.J. Dillon. Kelly Bryant, I won't give him that much credit.
Yeah.
I watched him on tape enough to see some of his physical tools, and borrowing, he makes some sort of adjustments as far as that. I really don't see it because this Clemson's team is still going to be run first.
Yep.
The guys that were on that team a year ago are still there, and they were successful enough to be run first. Whether it's Trevor Lawrence or Kelly Bryant or whoever at quarterback, it's still going to be a run first team next year regardless. And I don't think that he's going to have enough numbers. He might have enough wins, but he won't have enough numbers to really make it to New York. I think A.J. Dillon is probably the best shot. And maybe possibly sleeper, maybe Cam Akers.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
Cam Akers could, depending on how this offense all clicks, and if Florida State can get enough wins for expectations for him to get there.
Right. But all right, that does it about it today, folks. Remember, guys, please subscribe and hit the notification button so that way you're always updated and when we post new content here on the channel, MVP Podcast. Also, please leave a comment, asking us whether you want any new topics for us to discuss. I have Antoine here, also my friend Darius, and we will looking to have many other guests to talk about a range of topics here. Antoine will not only doing the college football stuff, he will also be part of the NFL podcast. He does a lot of the draft stuff. Please follow him on his Twitter, Facebook, and everything. Antoine, do you have any sort of where they can get you at?
Oh man, so everything is always at Draft Day 101. My Facebook, obviously, I do my own personal thing, but if you want to hit me up, just hit me up on Twitter, man. Draft Day 101.
Right, and he does a very good in-depth look and analysis on draft prospects. He is always studying film. There is not a day Antoine is not looking at film. I can promise you that. But all right, man, this has been the MVP Podcast College Football Edition. We'll talk to you guys later.